Alright guys, we've reached the final countdown at this point, just today and tomorrow, and then we're finito, so let's get right to it. Third parties of the United States. Now the US is predominantly a two-party system, and it's been predominantly a two-party system throughout its history, which, if you don't know what two-party system means, two major political parties go head-to-head in each election cycle. Obviously today it's the Republicans and the Democrats. It's kind of straightforward. However, if you remembered our History of Political Parties unit, it hasn't always been those parties. Remember our first two political parties, Federalists and Democratic Republicans? Yeah, they're gone. Third parties can have influence in government, tremendous influence in government. The most influential, obviously, being the Republicans. I love this meme of Abraham Lincoln because it's like, this is what happens when you waste your vote on a third party candidate. In that election, Abraham Lincoln was not part of the Democrats nor the Whig Party, yet he won. And you see how that changed everything. So let's look at some third parties in the United States and talk a little bit about where they stand in case you're interested in any of them. Let's start with the Green Party. Note, Mr. Shoens forgot to update the years, but they started in 2001, so it was 19 years ago. But anywho, Green Party. Current membership of the Green Party in the United States, 258,683 members. That's not a whole lot of people compared to the 43+ million people in both Republicans and Democrats, so these are much smaller, but they do exist. People in Congress, none. And if whether or not they swing either left or right on that political spectrum, they want more government involvement. I wonder why. So they are definitely on the left side of the spectrum. Now, when it comes to the beliefs, I'm just kind of go through it very, very quickly. I'm just kind of going with like ones that are similar to the Democrats, etc. Taxes, they think they should be even higher than what the Democrats propose because save the whales. Economics, they think there should be more government involvement, especially in the realms of saving the whales. Environment, save it and the whales. Immigration, they side on the Democrats. It impacts nothing for them for what they stand for, which is the Green Party, so environment. Abortion, they also side with the Democrats. It really makes no difference. Gun ownership, same concept, unless it's involving saving the whales, but that's from harpoons, not rifles. So they side with the Democrats. And then education, they also side with the Democrats. So it's kind of like a little bit more of an extreme version of the Democrats almost. But when I mean extreme specifically towards the environment. Save the whales. Anywho, let's move on to our next third party. Again, forgot to update the years, my bad. But it started in the 70s, and that is the Libertarian Party. Now, we talked a little bit about the Libertarians already, how they are even farther right than the Republicans. They want even less government involvement because of the word liberty. So, with that in mind, these guys are a bit more of an extreme version of the Republicans. Now, there's nobody in Congress for the Libertarian Party, and their current membership is about double compared to the Green Party, but obviously significantly less compared to any of our two major political parties. And whether or not they swing left or right on the political spectrum, they swing to the right, less government involvement. Side note, every year I always ask the question, because they usually do like a project for these political parties, which logo is the right logo? Yeah, it's actually both of them. It's weird. And don't ask why there's a porcupine. I don't know. Anywho, core beliefs of the Libertarian Party. Now, taxes, they should be as low as it can go, or even non-existent. Again, less government involvement. If a government that is significantly smaller is not going to need as much taxes, if any at all, depending on what the government is. Economics, they side with laissez-faire, a little bit more of the whole dosage of laissez-faire, so they side with the Republicans just a little bit farther along. The environment, they actually side with the Democrats, which is kind of interesting in the sense that Democrats want more government involvement when it comes to the environment. It's more along the lines of this party sides with the Democrats in the realms of like climate change and global warming. The way to fix it, more personal accountability versus government involvement. Immigration, open borders, but unlawful immigrants kicked out. I'm not sure how that would work personally. I get the concept of open borders because the less government involved would eventually mean that there would not be people in those borders to protect them. I don't know how you would then have people kicking out unlawful immigrants, but it's interesting. This meme kind of explains a lot with the Libertarian Party, at least how it's presently constructed in the U.S. Abortion, pro-choice, which is kind of interesting because you'd think, what, don't they side with the Republicans? Well, no, because if they're a less government involvement, then there should be pro-choice, because why should the government tell you whether or not you should have an abortion or not? Gun ownership, let the states decide gun laws, which kind of is how the Republicans view on this. So keep the federal government out of it and just let the states decide. If the states want to tighten up restrictions, let that state do it. That state decided to do it. If a state doesn't, then let that state do it. Education, they want to end the public school system as we know it, and actually potentially end compulsory education as we know it, meaning school would not be a requirement. There's your short summary of the Libertarian Party. I know each year some people are kind of shocked at the Libertarian Party because it's usually hyped up for many other reasons than this. I'm just going with their core beliefs at this point. What I expected Mel Gibson. I got this man with his tongue. Anywho, let's move on to the Socialist Party. Now, this party was founded also in the 70s. Current membership, about less than 70,000. It really just depends, because some of these people in this party actually have migrated back to the Democrat Party, and some people in the Democrat Party have migrated to the full package of socialists. Anywho, people in Congress, there are obviously none when it comes to being right or left. These guys are farther down the left. These are farther down the left compared to Democrats. They might even be considered the far left, but I can argue that's more communism. But anywho, core beliefs. It was so cold this morning, I saw a socialist with his hands in his own pockets. Burned. Anywho, taxes. They should be as high as they can go. Not to the extreme necessarily of communism, where there would be absolutely no taxes. I'll explain that in a second. But basically, more publicly owned stuff is going to require more money, so taxes as high as they can go. I mean, if you want a number figure, think 80% and up. Economics, major government involvement, obviously publicly owned enterprises where the government's in charge of these things. The environment, side with the Democrats. So they side with the Democrats when it comes to the whole global warming issue, climate change, etc., etc. Government should be involved with it. Immigration, open borders. There's a hilarious joke there, but I'll just let your imagination go with it. Abortion, pro-choice. When it comes to that, again, it's not necessarily because of the situation that they don't want the government involved when it comes to abortion. It's more of most socialist states are very secularized, where they would not care necessarily the value of human life. But anywho, gun ownership, gun rights on a state level, which is actually kind of interesting if you think about it. But at least in the Socialist Party in the U.S., that's where they stand. At least that's where they stood 2 years ago. Education, more funding for school, more publicly run schools, stuff like that. It's socialism prescribed into an American party. I will say that as far as the Socialist Party in the U.S., I mean, it's not like the Socialist Party in like Russia. I mean, that one's even farther down the left, but it's still left as far as the political spectrum goes. So there's some differences between the Socialist Party in the U.S. compared to like a Socialist Party in like Europe. But anywho, let's go deeper down the rabbit hole and go all the way to Wonderland at that point and go where the end goal of socialism is, which is communism. So the Communist Party of the U.S. Now this party was founded in the early 1900s, same with like the Communist Revolution over in like Russia, the Reds, all that different stuff, you know, Karl Marx, blah, blah, blah. There's your huge history on communism right there. So this party's been around for quite some time, but there is not a lot of traction in it for the United States. For as big as communism is around the world, there is less than 5,000 people actually signed up to the Communist Party of the U.S. It's a really small party in the U.S. I mean, if you don't know, our nation has not liked communists for a very, very, very long time for good reasons. So there's no senators, no congressmen in the House of Representatives or the Senate. And when we're looking at that political spectrum, communism is as far left as you can go. I mean, it's complete takeover of government in every aspect of life. So the core beliefs. Communist jokes aren't funny unless everyone gets them. Lenin jokes. Okay. Taxes. There would be no taxes in a communist system, which you might think is great. But there's also no income, so the taxes are essentially 100%. Economics, complete government control in economics. Environment, they side with what our Democrats side with as far as the global warming, climate change, etc., etc. Immigration, everyone is welcome into a communist nation. Everyone. Abortion, they are pro-choice. Gun ownership, nope. Education, state-sponsored education, i.e. public school, i.e. et cetera, et cetera. It's pretty much the communism like prescription thrown into a political party in the US. They just prescribe to the ideals of communism. Um, Obviously, you see that not a lot of people are here, so moving on. The last one we'll talk about here is the Constitution Party of the U.S. Now, this kind of goes by a different name as well. Some people call it the Tea Party movement. It kind of started as a little bit of a Tea Party movement. There's currently about 97,000 members in the Constitution Party. It's kind of in the name what they stand for. They stand for the U.S. Constitution. No one in Congress when it comes to the Constitution Party. Again, these are all third parties, and if you look at the numbers, there's not a lot of people in these parties to get people elected for those highly prestigious positions. As far as where they're at in the political spectrum, they are on the right. They're kind of like a mix between Republicans and Libertarians. But anywho, core beliefs of the Constitution Party. So they believe that taxes should be lower. They believe that the economics, there should be less government involvement. They pretty much just go and prescribe like by the Constitution. If you're trying to find it in the Constitution where it says the government will pay for its citizens' health insurance, it's like, it's not there, so we don't like it. The environment, protect God's natural resources. So in other words, protect the natural resources, kind of sides with both parties in that when it comes to the environment, protect the environment. Immigration, they side with the Republicans. Abortion, they are pro-life, which is kind of, interesting to say the least. The reason behind it is because they feel like human rights, as far as like your Bill of Rights, as in your rights of American citizens, does not start when you are born. So if the Constitution says you have rights, you have those at conception. You don't have it just because you are out the womb at that point. Gun ownership, Second Amendment or bust. Again, these are pro-Constitution guys. So whatever, they're strict constitutionalists. Whatever the Constitution says, that's what we go with. Education, let the states decide, which is another Constitution thing. That's a reserve power. Let the states decide those whole issues with school choice or public schools because that is a reserve power. Anywho, those are your major third parties in the United States. But what if even after looking at like all those 7 political parties we went through, you're like, yeah, there's still none that I like. Well, that's simply being independent at this point. You don't have to prescribe to a political party if you choose not to. Long story short, if you just want to be independent and you just vote based upon the issues, that's a-okay. Now, there is some drawbacks to this. When you get to like an election, like a primary election, you can't vote in those elections. But in the general election, where the votes actually count towards getting people positions, you have no problem voting. Other negatives of being independent, there are people who swing on the left and people who swing on the right in the political spectrum in this category. So just because you're an independent doesn't mean another person next to you who is also independent will have the same exact views as you. Anywho, with our last discussion for political parties, I'm going to do a brief introduction on interest groups. Now, what is an interest group? Basically, interest groups are groups of individuals with a specific common interest who are trying to influence government and public policy. So how is that different from a political party? Political parties have a big spectrum of beliefs that they're trying to prescribe. Interest groups are interested in basically one thing. Political parties are looking to get someone elected. Interest groups are looking to get laws passed on that particular issue they're passionate about. What can these guys do for government? Really a lot. I mean, have you ever heard of stuff like Planned Parenthood or the NRA? Any of those ring a bell? They are super, super impactful when it comes to getting people elected into office, as well as trying to get laws passed, or even getting stuff like Supreme Court decisions overturned, whatever it may be. So they're hugely involved when it comes to electioneering, which is basically getting certain candidates who prescribe to certain values elected. If someone is super pro-choice, then someone like Planned Parenthood might endorse them or give them a donation. If someone is pro-Second Amendment, the NRA might give them a donation or an endorsement, etc. Litigation, they bring up issues to courts. Example of this would be like that Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education. It was the NAACP that literally sued, and then Thurgood Marshall took the case, and that ended segregation. It wasn't a political party, it was an interest group. Publicity stunts. I mean, it takes a lot of power. That shows how much power an interest group has. If they can train these polar bears to literally go in front of a Shell plant and say, stop Shell gasoline and save the Arctic and stuff. That takes a lot of effort. So again, they can use publicity stunts in order to gain attention for their causes. They can lobby to certain people, as in they'll hire lobbyists to go to legislators, be like, hey, you should do this, etc., etc. Let's just talk about some notable interest groups. There is a ton of them, a ton of interest groups. I'm going to keep it at 7 ones just to introduce you that they exist. The first being the NAACP, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. That started back in the early 1900s. Biggest things you've seen with them is obviously they are the ones responsible for getting segregation out of public schools. So pretty important. That's all I'm going to say about it for now. Moving on. The American Medical Association. This is one of our oldest lobbying groups. This is 170 something years old now. They support healthcare reforms in the United States. They support fighting the war on drugs, medical malpractice, pretty much a bunch of medical stuff. Again, they're interested in something specifically. American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. So these are our largest group for pro-Israel that lobbies to the government of the United States. Anything supporting Israel, whether it be the war on terror, aid to Israel, moving the recognition of the Jerusalem as the capital, which is something President Trump did, I believe, late last year, if my memory serves me correct. It took a long time to do that. But they're in charge of advocating and lobbying for Israel. The AARP, yeah, those guys who give out the cards, who give elderly people discounts for coffees and stuff, that's an interest group. Guess what they're interested in? Old people. There's about 37 million people in the AARP, and their revenue and expenses exceed over $1 billion. So, bottom line, I mean, these are big interest groups. So these guys would be huge lobbyers for like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, etc. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce. What? This is an interest group? That sounds like something that's like a department of like the executive branch. It's not. It's literally an interest group that literally lobbies to America about stuff like against government shutdowns, supporting business, globalization, free trade, offshoring, etc., opposing stuff like the Affordable Health Care Act. Anything dealing with commerce, they are lobbying with. And then the final big one, the NRA, which is a interest group that is very pro-Second Amendment, pro-gun rights, all that different stuff. They're supportive of candidates who promote gun-friendly legislation. Now, your last slide of your senior year for government. Tomorrow we're going to be doing a kind of a fun political quiz that I'll be showing an actual video of me taking the quiz with you guys. A word of caution for you guys when it comes to political parties and stuff like that. Just like when we talked about civil liberties, that your civil liberties are in danger because of people interpreting them differently versus what you actually have and how your rights can be taken away from you. It's literally the Miranda rights. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, meaning that you have the right to remain silent, but if you don't, we're going to use it against you. Be careful who you vote for at the end of the day. Be sure whoever you vote for, you're voting for that person, whether they be a guy or a gal, and they're not threatening your rights, the things, your beliefs, all that different stuff. Because once people get into power, it takes a lot of effort to get them out of power. And not only that, they can do some irreparable damage while in there. So make sure you guys take the responsibility to vote properly and vote for the right people, whoever it may be, whoever lines up with your values. And that's my last word of caution for you guys on that. Anywho, guys, that's the last slide of your senior year. Tomorrow I have a video where it's literally going to be talking about going through this quiz online that kind of shows you where you're at on the political spectrum. I hope you guys find that fun. I thought it'd be a little bit more fun than doing like an assessment on your last day. So be sure to do that. Otherwise, take care, guys.